Story 1. Two kids were dealing, let's just say, stuff out of their lockers. One had a locker upstairs and the other's locker was downstairs. Everyone who bought it knew the combinations. People were told which locker had their merch, and when you had class on that floor, you'd get a hall pass and stop by the locker. A teacher got suspicious of seeing multiple kids going to the same locker. I will never forget being in class and getting the lockdown announcement while narcotic dogs were brought in, and seeing one of the kids flying down the hallway toward his locker. Story 2. Very weird kid in my year at the time came into school with huge amounts of hairspray in his hair. The amount where your hair eventually sticks like gel, but without actually using any. Guy that sat behind him in one of our classes happened to be one of the worst behaved kids in the school, and he proceeded to get out his lighter and light his hair on fire. It did not go up like if it were oil, but it definitely stayed alight long enough to see him running out the door with his hair smoking. Both kids were gone after that. Story 3. Dude smuggled a wine bottle. How did teachers find out? Well, the brass knuckles he was carrying in the backpack broke the bottle and spilled wine in the middle of the classroom. I guess this is why you only commit one crime at a time. Story 4. He stole a butcher knife from the cafeteria kitchen and attacked a teacher with it. They tried to subdue him and someone pulled the fire alarm. We all evacuated the building. In the ensuing scuffle with the principal, he dropped the butcher knife, but grabbed all the plastic knives and forks from the cafeteria. He ran outside to where we were standing and threw them at us. Since they were cheap plastic, nobody got hurt. He was eventually tackled by the gym teacher and principal, then carted away in an ambulance. Kid never came back to school. The school also decided that banning plastic knives and forks would prevent this incident from happening again, so they replaced all plastic silverware with sporks, which is the real tragedy. Kid did get the mental help he needed, and has gone on to be a productive member of society. Story 5. I came back after a 2-week holiday, I'd missed the last day before we broke up for Christmas, to discover that a person in my friendship group had been catfished for nudes by this guy in the year above, who had then posted them on social media. We took a hockey stick to the school library on the last day of term, destroyed his laptop, and broke his jaw and collarbone. Got expelled pretty quickly after that, but the kid who posted the photos got no repercussions. Story 6. Kid sprayed bear spray all over the boys' bathroom. It spread through the halls, and more than 20 to 30 people got it in their eyes and mouth and had trouble breathing, including some of my best friends, who had to go home because they couldn't breathe. Story 7. Oof, this is a good one. One of the teachers in my high school was born without his right arm from elbow down. He was the new English teacher, pretty young and good looking. We also had another new female teacher come in that year, who was quite attractive. If you've ever heard of the movie Teeth, it's about this girl with teeth in her that likes to eat things or whatever. Anyway, some kid photoshopped both of their faces onto the movie poster and made it say, "Mr. Blank didn't always have one arm." The picture got around pretty fast, and I went to Catholic school, and this was a big no-no. The kid was super smart too. What a shame. Story 8. In the canyons near our housing, there were lots of old World War II ordnance from when it was a proving ground. Lots of people collected the mostly harmless dummy ordnance. However, some kids found a mortar round and blew it up while they were playing catch with it. 2 of the 3 kids died. So the alarm went off to turn in whatever you had. They found some really impressive collections. So the fire department and Army EOD came to our school to show us some examples of what we could come across. As we sat in the bleachers of the gym, this kid stood up, holding what appeared to be a shiny aluminum softball, and asked if it was anything. The EOD guys froze, and we all had to evacuate. Turned out to be from a cluster bomb. Never saw that kid again. Story 9. When I was in middle school, around age 13, there was a girl in the class sending threatening emails with rather serious threats to all the popular girls. It ended up escalating to where the FBI was involved, and turns out one of the popular girls herself who was targeted was the one sending the messages. This was the late 90s, so don't think she even bothered to cover her tracks, and just used her home computer. Her decomposing body was found in the river 10 years later. Looking back on it all, I'm pretty sure she had undiagnosed mental problems that were starting to surface. and was one of those people who never managed to get them under control. Story 10. I'm from the Midwest. This was the mid-90s. A middle schooler went bird hunting over the weekend. He still had shotgun shells in his coat jacket on Monday. No weapon, just the shells. When he got to school, he realized the shells were there and immediately turned them in to the principal. He was suspended from classes until the board made their decision, and he was eventually expelled. Kid made an honest mistake, did the right thing to correct the mistake, and was punished to the maximum for it. Story 11. He crushed a canister of pepper spray with pliers until it exploded. They evacuated the entire school and shut down that wing of the school for 3 days until the city and school district cleared it for safe use. If I remember correctly, it hospitalized one student for a few days, and earned the guy some juvenile time and hefty fines. That area of the school smelled like old fish and bleach for weeks afterwards. Story 12. My friend left his BB gun and pocket knife in his backpack by accident. The police did a random search of certain classrooms that day, and his room was picked. Quite frankly, when I found out, I was not surprised that he was expelled. What I was surprised about was that he didn't get expelled for marijuana possession or setting off fireworks in the middle of the amphitheater. On the latter, I was disappointed. Story 13. A kid and his friend egged the school from an airplane. It was crazy. The one guy's dad had a Cessna or something with a private strip in the middle of a field. One night, they went to the egg farm next door, stole a bunch of eggs, then took off in the airplane in the middle of the night. Apparently, they did manage to drop eggs around the school. But early in the morning, the fog set in, and they could not find their way back to the landing strip. They ended up flying very low around town. Post 9/11 freaked everybody out. One of the hotels was even evacuated. Eventually, they were arrested and expelled from our school for it, but I think it took authorities a while to figure out what happened. Story 14. Well, technically this doesn't count because they were never caught, even though the police were called in to investigate. But this is some next level stuff. So we have classrooms called temporary classrooms. I don't know if you have them in other countries, but it's small separate classrooms that were made out of a dense type of drywall. So during our official test period, they store all the tests in one classroom. So these tests have been marked, but not revised, and have therefore not gone through admin yet. So Monday we come back to school, and during assembly with the entire school, which we had every day, our headmaster is pissed. He's genuinely a nice guy, but at this moment he's bright red and shivering with anger. Apparently, a student snuck into the school and put a fire hose through a cracked window and flooded the entire classroom. A teacher later told us that the tests were literally adrift in the water. The classroom sustained a crap load of water damage as well, and after no one came forward, the police started a vandalism investigation. All the appliances in the class were also ruined, and some of the files of the teacher, to whom the class belonged, got damaged, and she had to do everything over. They never found the culprits, and used some of our assignment marks for the subjects which tests got completely destroyed. Also, our disciplinary teacher lived in a house and joined the school. He has sheep. Every year, a group of students carry on the tradition of painting the school's roof and painting his sheep and letting them onto the school grounds. Each year, they get suspended for a week. A group of guys also put silicone into the key slots in all the doors. The silicone dried overnight, and we weren't able to get into our classrooms. They had to remove the doors completely. We got the whole morning off, and he got suspended for a while, but left a legend. Story 15. This kid wasn't expelled, but I genuinely do not see why he wasn't. 7th grade in Sweden. Casual class for those who need extra time for Swedish/English. In the middle of the class, he pulls out a revolver replica, which looked insanely real, and points it up at the ceiling. He was sitting further behind than most everyone, so the first one to notice it was the teacher. The expression on his face was something along the lines of, "What the F?" while the kid was smirking. That day was the first day I had ever seen that teacher walk that fast over to confiscate it. Nonetheless, I was scared for a second, because that kid wasn't really someone you could think good of when you'd see a revolver in his hand, you know? Thankfully, he wasn't there to shoot us up, because that would not have been fun. Thanks for not killing us. Story 16. At lunchtime, one kid managed to sneak inside the school library and made all the computers go onto an adult site. Shortly after that, they wore a white mask and took out a water gun, threatening to shoot if people don't bow down to him. Story 17. When I was in 3rd grade, some kid got expelled for bringing knives to school for protection. He was a bit of a hothead. He never used them on anyone, but all the kids knew he had one on him at all times. When he got caught a few weeks into it, his parents were called in, and apparently they were trying to justify the kid having the knives at school. Most kids never saw the kid after he went to the office that one day. Story 18. She was pissed that she had to move schools, so she set her new one on fire. Snuck out of the school during lunch with some matches and set one of the trees in the nearby bushland on fire, which spread to the science block and then to the English block. Firefighters were called, and we evacuated and got sent to the gym. She didn't even try to hide it. She bragged about it until one student eventually dobbed her in, and then she was gone. Story 19. I went to a Catholic school, and a 7th grader brought and did all kinds of narcotics, including the typical, like weed, alcohol, tobacco, and other more nasty stuff. He was expelled and had to go to a school in another county, which is a really bad school. I was dating a girl who lived next to him, and he and I became very good friends. I'm a bit older than him, but he's a mature kid. He's like the little brother I never had. He does a lot of stuff that pisses me off, but I keep him out of trouble for the most part. Not everyone who gets expelled are bad people. They're often misunderstood, and that leads them to make bad decisions. Story 20. There were 2 kids, best friends. Kid 1. We had this little nature center in my high school, and it had a little pond with a bunch of fish. Well, Kid 1 decided it would be super cool to jump in and fish out, no pun intended, as many fish as he could get. Gut them. He liked to carry around a pocket knife for safety reasons and throw them at the students and teacher one day. I only know this because one of my friends was there and wanted to put it in the school's newspaper but was denied to do so. Kid 2. To be honest, I thought it was kind of funny, but totally F-boy material at the same time. Anyways, we had a photography class at school, and were only allowed to take the very expensive cameras out of the classroom to take pictures when we had assignments. So Kid 2 ended up taking said camera home. Not sure how, because our teacher would count every camera before the class let out for the day. And when he got home, he took a bunch of dick pics with the expensive camera, and when he got to class the next day, thought it would be a good idea to download and print the dick pics on the class computer. Apparently, he only wanted to sneak the pictures into his crush's backpack. But somehow, he left the camera drive in the computer, and the teacher found his dick pics and not only told the principal but showed her as well. Dude was expelled that very day, only a week or so after his best friend. Pretty sure his crush didn't receive the dick pics either. Story 21. Our football field in high school had a big sign behind the home bleachers that said, "Go Tigers, beat the..." insert opposing team. And before homecoming, I switched it to, "Go Tigers, beat the meat." It got pulled down before the game and homecoming court was announced and all that. And there were only maybe several hundred people that saw it, so it wasn't hugely successful. But 30 plus years later, people are still talking about it. Only suspended for 3 days, and like 1 month of cafeteria duty wiping down tables and stuff. But I only did like 3 days of that, so the juice was totally worth a squeeze. Story 22. Back in 6th grade, there was a kid who I will call John. Now, John, I think, had some undiagnosed psychiatric issues that would cause him to just explode in frustration, but he was otherwise a nice kid. We both had a science teacher who was just an insufferable asshole. He would make it a habit to antagonize and mock kids who he didn't like. Well, one day, during some downtime, John was asking the teacher for help with something. The teacher said something rude like, "There isn't enough time in this life to help you." John obviously freaks out, yanks the asshole teacher's personal iMac G3, it was blue, off the desk, and throws it out of the 3rd-story window to crash against the pavement. Effing karma, man. Story 23. Semi-castrated the principal with his boot. At least, that was the rumor. Kid was best friends with my brother, and he confirms the story. Kid had a bit of an aggression issue, and what we today would recognize as some sort of ADHD type of disorder. But this was in the late 80s, so nobody had thought that it might be a disorder and not just a lack of a good beating. Kid rode his bike in the hallways in grade 8 or 9. The principal saw this and kindly asked the kid if he would be so kind as to not do that by yanking the kid off of the bike. Kid responded by applying his right foot to the principal's gonads, foobarring one testicle to the point where it had to be amputated. When I went to the same school a couple of years later, the principal was still there, but he was quite docile. Story 24. 2 years ago, a lesbian couple was nominated for the Homecoming King and Queen Court, and they won it. Everyone was really happy for them, except a few major assholes. At my high school, it's tradition for seniors to have their own parking space, and they get to paint their parking space and make it custom. It's really cool. So right after the homecoming football game, the pieces of shit went out to their parking spaces and vandalized them, taking spray paint and painting swastikas on their parking spaces, and writing ugly dykes on one of them. They were expelled less than a week later. Story 25. This didn't happen at my school, but it happened to one of my friends. He got expelled from public school because he switched the pills of a bunch of students with candy when he was in the nurse's office by himself. One of the kids in question was basically a real-life version of Fregley from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. This happened on the day of a big school assembly, and the kid had such a sugar rush that he ran out onto the stage, as the day he was born, screaming, "I am the Emperor of France!" There were cameras in the nurse's office, so they instantly found out it was him, then promptly expelled him. Story 26. This kid, 18 years of age, opened the window, leaned over, pulled a lighter out of his pocket, and lit a bird nest that was just sitting there on fire. For no reason, apparently. Smoke started getting into the building. Everyone panicked because the janitors just kept saying there was a fire in a classroom, and we rushed outside. It turned out to be nothing serious, but that was not the wisest decision. Story 27. Pre-explanation. All the teachers in my middle school got a Bluetooth speaker of their choice provided by the school so they could play work music. So one kid in my class, let's call him Joe, connected his phone to all the teacher speakers in every class and played an adult video on it at full volume, and in the last period of the day, the teacher he had got one that said what just connected to the speaker. So before the video started playing, the speaker said, "Joe's phone has connected." Story 28. In second grade, I was line leader, and that morning the school was having electrical issues with the lighting. When we got to the end of the hallway, I stopped, but people kept going, and I was pushed into the fire alarm. Apparently, you can push or pull, and I went shoulder first into the alarm. Basically, the school was evacuated, and the fire department showed up. I thought I was safe when a teacher said there was scheduled evacuation that day, but after the fire department showed up, my first grade teacher said that I did it. There's no way she could have known or seen from her room. Long story short, I got in school suspension before they decided to 86 me. Story 29. Some kid asked to go to the bathroom. Little did the teacher know he would hop up on the toilet, remove the ceiling tile, and climb up in there. He crawled his way through until he reached another bathroom. No idea how he was caught, but his explanation as to why he did it was because the soap dispenser was empty. Story 30. In middle school, there was a mystery afoot. Someone was taking crap and smearing a trail 20 to 30 feet long on the corridor walls. It was pretty revolting, and continued on for at least a month or so. This Jack the Ripper-style manhunt was on, and finally they caught the culprit. It was the kid who was known for smelling terrible, who was shortly after expelled. Not exactly a Sherlock Holmes masterpiece of deduction, but at least the hallways didn't smell like crap, and you didn't feel like you needed a biohazard suit anymore.
He'd construct his own religion around bionicles, and he would hiss around anyone that tried to talk to him. He also wore this heavy blue windbreaker year-round, even when it was blistering hot. I think he was really lonely, and wanted to seem different for attention. I tried talking to him once. He hissed at me. Edit, this was in high school. He would have conversations with himself under his breath like Gollum. In the middle of one of these rage-filled arguments, he would pull out his handgun and people in the class. All our teachers ever said was, "Hey, no guns." He also made notes that we would occasionally find, one specifically on why the person who sat behind him in math deserved to die. But then he found Facebook and other online communities and calmed down a bit. All our teachers ever said was, "Hey, no guns." Wow. My 4-year-old made a laser gun from Legos and we had to have a meeting about it. Someone walked in on him a doorknob. He was quiet because he didn't speak much English. I assumed that he was struggling with some sexuality issues, but getting caught on a doorknob in middle school is just devastating in the strange kid rumor mill. Number 1, got a giant dragon tattoo on his back when he was 15. Number 2, always ran around at full speed, hunched over like he was a character on Naruto. Number 3, parkoured over everything imaginable. Not 100% on this, but I think he's a ninja. Did he have both arms straight back while he was running? Well, duh, it's aerodynamic. When I was in junior high, there was a guy who could recite the weather forecast for each of the next 5 days. Clever kids that we called him the weatherman. That was decades before the internet and iPhones, so was actually kind of handy. I went to the weird high school, so there are a lot of, but my personal favorite was the Jetpack kid. He was a freshman when I was a senior, and no matter where he was going, he was running flat out with his hands in fists and his arms tucked under his backpack like there were nozzles for his jetpack. Please tell me he made sound effects. A little, not very loudly though. He had cat ears glued into his hair, and he sat on the ground like Gollum, holding pieces of bread to his face and nibbling on them like a cat. He seemed really startled when I invited him to sit with us and spoke quietly. Didn't see him in our area after that much. It was really nice of you to invite him to sit with you. I was one of the weird kids in school, and someone doing that for me would have meant the world, despite how shy I might have seemed. Good on you. She would always have conversations with herself during class, often while the teacher was speaking. One day she showed up and shaved the front of her hair so that it looked like she had a horrible receding hairline. After a couple of weeks looking like that, she took to wearing Halloween wigs. She'd sometimes talk about her pet flying squirrel, and nobody believed that she actually had one, so she started trying to take him to school with her every so often, and he'd always get into trouble. During lunch, she would sit by herself at the table, pick a person out, and literally mimic their every move for the entire lunch period. Very bizarre. He tried to end a classmate with a screwdriver. He also stuck cinnamon Tic Tacs up his own nose. I can still hear the screaming. The kid's name was Jared. He told us after that he pissed himself that he did it because it was warm. He rolled in mud puddles very often. Jared liked to eat pencils. Not just the erasers, the entire pencil. Wore historically accurate British Royal Navy uniforms around a campus a few days a week. He's a really nice guy and a very knowledgeable person about history. Pretty eccentric though. Edit. So pleased to hear that many of you think you know this guy. Guess this is a bit more common of a quirk than I thought. I'd like to think that he ended up becoming a history professor at some major university who dresses up for every period of history that he covers. There was a kid who drove to each classroom in high school. He would make the noises, throw them in reverse to avoid hallway traffic, and slam the brakes to pick up girls and drive them to class. He had his favorite girls, and he would buy them new cars, quote unquote, and ask them how they liked the interior / new car smell, etc. on the drive to class. Side note, he had a breath like that SpongeBob episode where the green fog leaked out of his mouth every time he opened it. This was all inside my high school. It was a closed campus. This dude really liked cars. Told everyone that his name was Soul Reaper. He was the self-proclaimed gangster emperor and a vampire. He would run around with his forearm over his face like he was shielding himself from the sun with a pretend cape, hide in the shade and hiss at people as they walked by. Sometimes he would charge them when he hissed and chase them away. If they didn't run, he would do his little cape thing and flee back to the shadows. While on a school sports trip, we stopped at Denny's for lunch. He sat at a table by himself and shouted at the waitress to get me another Coke like 3 times. He ate his burger so fast that it got stuck in his throat, I think. No biggie though, because he just pushed it down his throat with his fork to the horror of the other nearby diners. That is just one example. A kid I knew in high school was sent to residential school for problem kids. Apparently, whenever anybody new came, their family had to write them a letter about why they were there, and they had to read it out loud in front of everyone. One kid was sent there because he would have temper tantrums if he didn't have one specific thing for lunch every day. Ketchup and mayo mixed. He had some strange name for it. Not the point though. The point is that his temper tantrums consisted of him screaming at the top of his lungs and furiously jacking it wherever he happened to be. Damn it, I'm too late for this one, but a girl I went to school with would constantly be trying to turn into a Super Saiyan. People would walk by and say, "Power up, Christy," and she would start screaming and trying to charge up. I always thought it was kind of up and not funny though. "You fools! This isn't even my final form." Combined all of his lunch food into a single pile. Ate it like a miner looking for valuable ore while using every condiment the school provided. I can never forget the one time he added corn, green beans, hot sauce, mayo, mustard, relish, and a roll. It's been 20 years or so, it might not be totally accurate, to his pizza. Just started gobbling away like every other day that ends in Y. I happened to be looking right at him, see him pause and stare straight ahead, not at me, just into nowhere, for an awkward 5 seconds, lean leans over and pukes all over the walkway between tables, sits right back up, and with that same awkwardness as before, just continues staring into space. Just as the janitor arrives to spread wood dust or whatever it is on the puke, the kid starts eating the amassed pile of food he's collected again. The janitor's face while he cleaned the puke right next to the kid who puked it up, I always remember. It clearly and non-verbally said, "This kid has some serious issues." The kid continued to eat the amalgamation of food and stare into space as the janitor just cleaned it up, clearly thinking that he wasn't paid enough to do this shit. They never are. When I was in 7th grade, there was a kid whose last name was Rocha, and since he invariably smelled like pungent cat, he was called the Roach and teased constantly by kids at my school. I never spoke to him until I shared a number of school classes with him in summer. He was assigned to me as a partner for a project, and getting to know him better, I realized he was perfectly normal. He liked video games, TV shows, his only immediately noticeable flaw being his terrible stench. About a week before our presentation was due, he wasn't in his seat in class. The teacher informed us that he drowned in a canal over the weekend. I was shocked, mainly because I'd seen him like a few days earlier. I felt horrible when the kids I knew started joking about how he finally took a bath. I lost a couple of friends for yelling at them about how they were awful people and how he was a nice guy. My only regret is that I hadn't spoken to him sooner. He could have used a friend during the short time that he was here. Rest in peace, Andrew Rocha. We had a kid back in my high school that lied to everyone that he got the part of Anakin Skywalker for episode 2. He would skip weeks of school to prove that he was on set and walking us through the kissing scene with Natalie Portman. All in all, he missed almost an entire semester's worth of days in a single year just to prove a point. Here's the strangest part of the lie. He continued the ruse for months, long after it was announced that Hayden Christensen was playing Anakin, and we saw the first teaser trailers. She used to pull her hair out. Chunks of hair used to roll around the playground like tumbleweeds. We were all 8-year-olds, but she seemed a lot older. Her family had just come from Chicago. She only spoke French, which none of us understood, and she also had no friends. She was taken out of our school after a few months. She would literally sit in the back of math class and make beeping and fire truck noises. And when confronted, she would just get quiet and stare at you till you left feeling uncomfortable and violated. And then she would just do it again. She would just start. I don't understand. Oh, and by the way, she's in the Air Force now. Thought she was a horse. Would run around the halls on calloused knuckles and only communicate through whinny. She later went on to use her hair as a weapon. Using a move called the helicopter, whipped people with her ridiculously long braid. Was almost expelled for writing questionable notes to students with the teacher's signature and covering her face in lead powder from sharpened pencils. I'm doing fine now. This one kid wore an Avatar Ong head beanie every single day. It was just a weird flesh-colored fabric with a big arrow on it. And he ran everywhere on campus hunched with his big old heavy backpack. The joke was on us though when Humans vs. Zombies started up that year and he was randomly selected as the alpha zombie. He dropped that backpack and it was like Piccolo taking off his weighted clothing in DBZ. We learned that kid could run. Tagged out easily 50 people on the first day. Would take his big old hairy belly out, pile it into his desk, and slap it from side to side in class. Would walk leaning sideways against a wall so that he was about a 30-degree angle and he would move his arms like a locomotive. Stood behind people breathing really loud. Purposefully pooped his pants in class. Cut one loose in class and refused to acknowledge anyone's existence afterward, then randomly get up and leave several farts later, in a huff. Actual story, we had a kid in our high school called Big Ed. Now, Big Ed was a big boy, both lengthwise and widthwise, easily 400 pounds, at least 6'3". He had long, greasy black hair, and it was a generally good idea to give him space if you valued your life. One day on lunch, I was sitting, eating my lunch, and then I happened to spy Big Ed at the other end of the room. He didn't think anyone was looking, so he turned both ways, reached underneath his shirt, and pulled a chocolate chip cookie from underneath his man boob. He enjoyed that cookie. I had a guy who honestly wasn't that weird, but he would always fall asleep in class, and people would make fun of him before it because his head would always bob up and down as he went in and out of consciousness. Later in the year, he would invite a friend of mine and me to his birthday party, and I ended up getting forced to go by my parents and expected the worst. Imagine my surprise when we ended up going to Dave & Buster's and had a blast. His family was super nice and gave us game cards with unlimited tokens. After that, I felt really bad about the way he was treated in school. Really didn't deserve it. There was this one kid who never played during recess. He would sit under a tree and read a book. He was kind of chubby and soft-spoken, but he was very kind, very gentle, and very smart. I secretly respected him a lot. Thought he was a badass for doing his own thing. Later on in high school, it somehow finally broke that everyone respected the hell out of this kid. It was a known fact that he was the nicest, smartest kid around. Never really made him actively popular as he was still pretty quiet and kept to himself, but I was really glad to learn that he was respected by everybody.